Welcome to In or Out, a rapid-fire game where we discuss a handful of NBA topics and determine where we stand. For better or worse, we're talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers once again today. And joining me to work through all of this madness is Quincy Carrier. Quincy, thanks for being here for me during this tough time.
No problem, man. No problem. Nobody suffers through the Cavs ups and downs like Tony Pesta. Okay? Look.
True, man.
Nobody should ever have their fan card checked. Like you should not have it checked. Okay. It's funny because you get these arguments. They're like, I swear you're not watching the game. I'm like, yo, dog, he posts clips. Like
Yeah,
sometimes
that's
I
the
know the
craziest
game is happening
accusation
because
I've read.
Tony's tweeting. I'm like, okay. They on
It's like,
Valley right now. Like,
if you follow my account even for a day, you'll see I post all the clips. So I always get a kick out of that one when they say you're not even watching the games. I'm like, buddy, someone's clipping this and posting it on my account. But
Anyways, on the
anyways,
clip that you retweeted, that you argued about, that you saw from his account.
Yeah, this all started with a quote tweet of my clip of the game, but that's a whole nother thing. It has been as up and down of a season as anyone could imagine. And so I think it's only natural we start off with the guy who has arguably been the most up and down all year, Darius Garland. Now, DG is having pretty easily the worst season of his last 3 years since that All-Star year, that breakout. His numbers are down pretty much across the board, but the season is not over yet. We still have the most important part of it coming up later in this month with the playoffs right on the horizon. So, Quincy, are you in or out on Garland being able to salvage this season when it matters most?
I think I'm probably out on it. Not because I'm like horribly out on Darius Garland. I just think the reality of his situation is just what it is. He said he lost like 11 pounds trying to recover from that jaw injury. That's serious. Like, especially for a player who's already borderline when it comes to size. And you see it affect his finishing ability. We know how weight fluctuations can really affect somebody's jumper. And those things, like, those aren't going to go away because he gets like comfortable or because he's rusty or something like that, right? Like, that's not really going to change things for him. Also, I think those things kind of accentuate some issues that he naturally has with this roster, with this team. And I think this season just kind of it was a worst case scenario for Darius Garland. I think everything that could have gone wrong for him this year pretty much went wrong. And this is just kind of what it is. But I don't think this is who he's going to be for the rest of his career. I think that's an important distinction to make. But as far as this season goes, I mean, it's just time to call a bird, man. Like, it is what it is. This just ain't the season for him. Everybody has down seasons. This is definitely a DG down season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very important distinction, and I will ask you about that in a minute about what this means moving forward. But as far as this year, I mean, you had it. It's been a perfect storm of all the worst things that could happen for DG. One of the big emphasis that he placed on the offseason was bulking up and adding muscle. And at the start of the year, we did see some of those benefits. To start off, he was having a career year inside of the paint. Among guards, he ranked 31st in the restricted area, which was pretty good. Since the All-Star break, since losing those 12 pounds, he is now 114th out of 116. So he's the second worst in the restricted area. He went from one of the best to one of the worst, just like that. I know people don't want to hear the excuse of, well, he fractured his jaw back in December. Listen, you're not getting those 12 pounds back until the summer at the earliest. You're not putting 12 pounds on during an NBA season. It just doesn't happen that way. So that's an injury that will affect him through the rest of the year. His ability to get into the paint is something that's going to limit him through the rest of the year. The one reason why I'll say I'm tentatively in on maybe he could still deliver something in the playoffs is he still has a flamethrower from downtown. For a couple weeks there after the break, he was leading the NBA in three-pointers. He's still in the top 10. He's cooled down a little bit. But really, teams have just found a way to neutralize him. He's an undersized guard at the end of the day. You take away that weight that he gained, and you take away Donovan Mitchell being next to him for most of this stretch. It's just too easy for teams to throw size at him, to double team him, to get rough with him. And he's had a hard time finding ways to break out of that. But considering that he's probably stuck with where he is right now for the rest of the year, do you have faith that he could bounce back next season if he's able to put all that weight back on?
Oh yeah, he'll be back to like what 22 again. Like he'll be back to those numbers. I think he's it's clear what's going on with him. Like as much as people don't want to admit it, I do think the one thing you would worry about him long term is that he's had a lot of injuries, like to his face
Mhm.
specifically, just on how he plays. Because he's just a smaller guy, he gets beat up a lot. They don't call a ton of fouls on him. Um, he puts his body through a lot of wear and tear. So like you do worry about that taking its toll and these things being things that pop up more than you would want them to. But I mean, it's not like he had the one good season, got the contract, and then put up this year, right? Like he last
Mhm.
year exists. He was pretty solid last year. You could argue just as good as he was in that All-Star year,
Mhm.
as far as numbers go. So yeah, I think he'll be back to what you expect Darius Garland to be. It's just right now, he's taking a picture at a bad angle, right? It's just a really unflattering angle for him this year, and it just is what it is.
Yeah, it's all just shaped up to really expose, as you said already. He was already undersized and a little malnourished. It looked like out there. So you add in he was drinking spaghetti out of a straw for a month and a half this year. Like it's a tough season for him. And the last thing that I'll say before we move on is that it is important to note that he had two really good years. And even this season, as bad as he's been, he's had moments here or there where you're like, okay, Darius Garland. There's been moments where I'm like, he's back. He looks like his normal self, and then it all goes downhill again. So it's not like he's just vanished. Players have down years, especially players of DG's caliber who even at his best, he's what, maybe a top 30 player in the NBA. Like this isn't an
Mhm.
all NBA MVP kind of guy. When you get to these all-star, the lower end of the all-star spectrum, you're gonna have seasons there for whatever reason, they're just not the same. They're maybe a step below where you'd expect, and then hopefully they'll bounce back. But you know who probably won't get an opportunity to bounce back? JB Bickerstaff. I think the
Yeah.
writing is all over the wall for JB right now, almost regardless of what happens in the playoffs. But barring even a miracle, I think he's probably gone this summer 100%. I don't think he's an awful coach by any means, but he has his limitations and they've been on display. So I want to ask you, are you in or out on this being the end of the road for JB?
It looks like it's time. Like it seems like we're at that point with JB where it's time to probably move on. And I was having this conversation with Cole earlier where we were talking about like, hey, like if the Cavs get to the Eastern Conference Finals, it's going to be real enticing to be like, well, let's just bring everything back. But I remind people like, hey, remember when Atlanta went to the Eastern Conference Finals and then they brought everything back, and then what did they do the year after? They pretty much blew it all up, right? Because the problems were still there. Like just because you had a couple things go your way in the playoffs doesn't mean that those problems aren't there, and they are there for the
Mhm.
Cavs. And look, it's not all JB's fault, but some of it could be his fault, and somebody is going to have to take the blame if this team like goes out
True.
bad or how the way that this season ended. And it's a rough deal for JB. I think he's a good coach. I just don't think that he is the right person for the job to figure out the problems that the Cavs have and to kind of create some creative solutions around that, right? Like one of the things we were talking about is it's not great that Evan Mobley's percentages have been up, but his attempts are down this year.
Mhm.
Like, and there's no reason for his attempts to be down when you look at how many guys have been injured. Now, Evan's been injured too, right? But we're
Mhm.
just talking about on a per game basis. You would think year three, he's showing some promise as a shooter. Okay, we're not getting the most from our guards this year. Let's see what Evan can do with a couple extra shots a game, right? Because we've all been waiting to see. We've talked about. I talked about this last year. Like, if Evan were on a bad team like Anthony Davis was early in his career last
Mhm.
year, he would be a 20 and 10 guy. Like people would be off his back about a lot of it because he averages 6 more points or 4 more points or whatever it is that people want him to average. But he just doesn't have that opportunity in his offense. And I do think, for the Cavs to hit their next step, like I think Evan Mobley getting more of a role on the offense, taking more of those shots is going to be what's necessary. And that's not something that I think you want JB in charge of long term. So, it's just it's a rough break, man.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I've always said I think JB really at worst is just an average coach. Like you'll see people say he's the worst coach in the NBA. Like he's not that bad. He deserves credit for establishing the rebuild and where they've gotten to. Can he take them to that next level? It's increasingly seeming like that's not really in the cards for him. The offense being one of the biggest issues is that, like, what are the Cavs' go-to plays? What is like the thing where you're like, okay, this is our bread
They
and butter.
should
This is what we're
really
gonna
have
do.
one with Donovan Mitchell
They
at this point, right? Like the
yeah,
confusion that continued, like this happened last year, it continues to happen this year. It's like, hey man, when the Cavs need a bucket, we
what are
knew
they
what they
running?
were going to when LeBron was here. Like, okay, LeBron's going to try to get this little fadeaway free throw jumper, or he's going to try to post up on the baseline and try to get to the basket and see if somebody cuts and sees if he can get an open three in the corner. Like, we knew what LeBron was going to do, and like it's tough to compare JB
Yeah.
to LeBron, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only frame of reference we have from like current Cavs teams that were good. But even like when with Kyrie was here before LeBron, we kind of knew what we were going to do. Like, okay, Kyrie, you're going to get on the wing. You're going to try to just pick and roll until you give him a favorable matchup. And then he's just going to do what he does in a one-on-one situation. So, yeah, the fact that we continuously, like, it seems like it's just a guessing game. Hey, what are we going to do? We need a bucket here. We're going to give Max Strus a three. Like, it just feels like we never have a plan for these things. And I think that's a big problem. I mean, the reason you got Darius and you got Donovan is for those kind of things. And you don't have those kind of things, it's not great. It's not great. And it's even like exacerbated when you're like, okay, well, you do want Evan Mobley to take more advantage of the promise that he's showing on the offensive end of the floor. And you just see like the disappointment that you've had with DG Donovan. And you just imagine it's probably not going to be much better if you try to get Evan involved too.
Mm. Yeah, and that's really, I think, the problem with JB's offense and just the whether it's him or the players, whatever it may be, like there's just no layers to it. It's like one of the benefits of having the core four of these four talented players is that you should have a whole bunch of different things you can do with them. And really, it doesn't feel like you have them playing off of each other all that much, especially when you need it most. I think about the way that even Allen during that stretch when it was Allen and Mitchell out there, they're using him above the break. He's pulling these mid-range jumpers. They're using him in so many versatile ways. And it kind of feels like they just haven't done that now that everyone's healthy. It's like they've just moved away from that. And so I don't know if JB is capable of making those big time adjustments that you see the top coaches in the NBA make. And overall, it does seem like it's probably time to move on and find a coach who can maximize whatever this roster is.
Yeah. And also, like, I think the coach has some role in how that roster gets put together too. And I'm not thrilled with like what I feel like JB's suggestions have been in that process, right? Like there's some moves where I'm like, you go back and you think about was bringing Carrot, like you brought on Karras when you did for a reason. Was extending him the right thing to do? You wonder that at times. It's just a number of things where you're like, I don't know if I love the moves that they've made, and like Kobe Altman is ultimately going to be the one who has the final say on that. But we know how these things work. Coaches have a big say in how things get done, too. And I'm just, it's just, I think JB's a solid coach. I think he has deserved some credit for sure, but I think it's about time for the Cavs to, leverage having a pretty solid roster into having or pursuing an upgraded coach.
Mm. Yeah, and just to quickly hit on that Karras point too, because this is a take that I've been wanting to get off. I wonder if the Cavs knew, if they had the foresight to know that they were getting Donovan Mitchell later that year, because they traded for Caris LeVert in 2022. Later on, they get Mitchell. Would they have gone for LeVert if they knew they were going to get Mitchell? And then at that point, once you already had LeVert, it's like, well, you don't want to lose the asset for nothing, so you extend him. Maybe they make a swing for someone else, a wing, someone who fits the roster a little better. But that's another take for another day because
my trade
Caris
deadline
LeVert,
deals are deadly, right? Because they made that move. We need somebody else who could score. Darius got hurt. Then 3 years later, Karras still on the team, and you're like, man, I would love a wing.
yeah. And they try to make LeVert a wing, and he's just not a wing. He's just not a wing.
Everybody they try to make a wing is just not a wing. Like Max Strus, like not really a wing. Same thing with Isaac Okoro. Like really good defender. At the end of the day, he's 6'5". He's not especially long. So
yeah,
there's going to be issues there. He's not a wing. So it's just a tough spot that they find themselves in. And I don't think there was any way that they can anticipate it, but if they could, I bet they would make different
Yeah.
moves.
For sure. Now let's move into my favorite topic of the day. And since we're already touching on a handful of potential moves the Cavs have made or could make, one thing that has been brought up a few times is the idea of trading Evan Mobley. Some people want him out of the door immediately for some reason. I know we're both very high on Mobley, so I know where we're going to stand on this, but are you in or out on him being an untouchable trade asset? So is this the type of thing where they're just hanging up the phone as soon as someone mentions Mobley, or where do you stand on that?
Well, if somebody offers you Wembanyama, yeah, you trade Evan Mobley. But like outside of anything ridiculous like that, probably not. No, I don't imagine that there's a move that you make. Like we forget that this team had no real playoff hopes until Evan Mobley was on the team. Like what spurred this, and like it's hilarious to me that Evan has kind of become a victim of his own success, because the reason he's not in a situation to score 23 and 12 every night, to have the whole thing built around him, is because he was good his rookie year. Like really good his rookie year. And that made the team get excited and build around and add these guys. And in doing that, they took a lot of shot attempts away from Evan Mobley because they were like, hey, we could be good right now. So we can't forget why we're here in the first place, right? Like Darius Garland was not the one that made the leap to make this team much better. It was Evan. That was the clear distinction that you had from previous years. Obviously, he's a great defender. I mean, he's getting even better on the offensive side of the ball. It's funny where people are like, he hasn't progressed. If you told me Evan Mobley in his first or second year was going to make a Ray Allen-esque corner three to win the game, I would have laughed in your face. That is something that happened this year. And when I watched it happen, I was like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, like, you know, I wasn't that surprised. Like he makes shots like that every once in a while. That is progression, right? Has he?
Definitely.
Yeah. Now, do people want him to be Anthony Davis or Tim Duncan or Kevin Garnett in year 3? No, he's not that. Okay. That's not what he is. But what he is still a really good developing player who's in a bit of a tough spot when it comes to development. And I think that's something that the Cavs will have to address this offseason, is like, hey, you run the risk of stunting his development if you don't allow him to become more part of this offense, because then you kind of just put him in that defensive player lane, and I think you get less out of Evan than you would have if Evan actually was on a bad team. It's weird how situations work, because sometimes it is good to go to a team that isn't good.
Yeah.
Like it's just weird because you don't want to end up like in a Hornet situation or in a Detroit Pistons situation where like you feel like the team is just surrounded by losers, but you also do want that opportunity to be there for the young guys to be able to develop and make mistakes and still get opportunities. And Evan just has not been afforded that. Every time he makes a mistake, it's on a contending team. And those mistakes get amplified and people make a big deal out of it. But if this team were a 20-win team, there would be nothing but Evan Mobley cam accounts where people are like, oh, he's the next thing. We get a wing next to this guy. He's going to be. So, you know, he's a victim of his own success, but he is still very, very good.
And to that point, the 3-point shot that he made, I mean, because he's on a team that takes winning seriously, if he misses that shot, everyone's going to be talking about, why is Evan Mobley taking a 3-pointer in that situation?
It's year 3 and he can't shoot like Ray Allen off the corner yet. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous how much.
But if he was on the Pistons and took that shot and missed it, nobody would have really cared as much, because they're like, oh, well, they suck anyway, and he's developing. They'd be way more patient with him in that situation. But since he's on a team that takes winning seriously, he takes that shot, he better make it. And really, that's what we're seeing. I think we just take for granted how good he already is and the subtle improvements he's made, because he isn't being afforded that opportunity to go out there and take 25 shots a night. Like, he has to improve on the margins, because that's the only area of growth he's been allotted on this team. And so we've seen him improve at the rim. We've seen him improve in rebounding. His 3-point shooting is slowly but surely developing. He's already, I mean, the moment he touched an NBA floor, he was a defensive player of the year caliber player. This season, obviously, the injuries kind of derailed any opportunity at making a run for that. But I'm pretty sure even next year, if he wins the award, he would be the youngest player to ever win it. So it's like sometimes we just take for granted how quickly Evan Mobley came in and was this good on defense and has improved slowly but surely on offense. And even another like hypothetical, if it had been Allen who got injured earlier in the season and it was Mobley alongside Mitchell during that run, I don't know what kind of difference that would make for how many games they won, but I bet Mobley would have had the statistical leap that everyone's been wanting to see. He would have been averaging 22 and 12 or whatever, and it would have looked better because it's like, oh, well, look at the numbers he's putting up. But we're kind of overlooking the growth that he has shown next to being almost buried by the other pieces on this team. And I don't think that you can overlook that.
Yeah, and he's not shooting threes because like that's what his game is. He's shooting threes
Mm.
because that's how he can get the ball to get some
Yeah.
shots. Like so he is adapting to what is available to him, and it's interesting to see because like I think the most accurate comps of him coming out of like college were the Chris Bosh one. And he's kind of being relegated to this Chris Bosh type role on this team offensively. I think he's capable of more than that. It's gonna be interesting question to see what the Cavs do if they recognize that, or if they're just so scared to death of losing that extra scoring with either Mitchell or Garland if they go or if they're traded, that they just kind of do whatever they can to not allow Evan to have that room for growth. And it's gonna be tough because now Evan's not gonna be doing it on a team that stunk. Like before he got there, he would be doing it on a team that was pretty good. And now they might have a couple of years where they go from like definite playoff seed to play in. And people are going to blame him for that. Right. And that's not really fair.
Yeah, no, definitely. And final point that I'll make before we move into our last topic here, as far as the actual idea of trading him. Listen, he's going to make $11 million next year. So you're not exactly getting a player back who's worth it. He's going to be a restricted free agent in 2025. So you basically have a high level talent locked up in Cleveland for the foreseeable future. Trading that when you're not going to get a return anywhere near his potential, that's just bad basketball decisions. And so it's the type of thing we really shouldn't even be discussing. But I felt like it would be a good topic for
let's
us.
trade Evan Mobley and get Zubac.
Because that's going to make the team better. Heading into our last topic here. So we had some comments from Donovan Mitchell that went viral over the weekend after the Cavs lost by 29 points to the Nuggets. It was originally reported like Mitchell was going on this big tirade in the locker room and he was pissed and he's having a full meltdown. In reality, now that the clip has been out there, he looked pretty calm and collected with his comments. He was really just saying, hey, we all have excuses to make. The team, all of us, we need to work through this and pull it together before it's too late because it's already April and we're running out of time to do it. So I want to frame the question this way. Do you think Mitchell's comments are a reason to be concerned? And to expand on that, how heavily do you think the upcoming playoffs are going to weigh in on Mitchell's future in Cleveland?
I don't think that I think those comments were more of a result of the fact that he hasn't been playing good basketball like in the month of March. I think this whole month he's only played 4 games, but he hasn't gotten over 20 points. Like he's got to be frustrated, player of his caliber. The team hasn't been playing their best basketball. I mean, if the fans are frustrated, he's clearly going to be frustrated. He's just frustrated right now, right? I think that's just what it is. He knows they need to play better basketball or else it's going to be not just the same story on the Cavs from last year, but it's going to be a ongoing story for 3 years with Donovan Mitchell getting bounced in the first round, right? He knows that that's going to be put on him and his reputation as a playoff player, right? Like that's going to go away if he loses in the first round again, and he knows that he's staring in the barrel of that. Now, as far as like, will it affect his playoff standing? I mean, not playoff standing, my bad. I'm tripping. His free agency standing for this team or coming back? I don't think it does because he's going to make a decision based on where it makes sense for him to play basketball. And there's not that many places that make that much more sense to the Cavs, even with their current situation. So I don't think that anything's gonna like just losing in the first round. Like, he knows there's problems with his roster. That will be part of the pitch. Hey, we're gonna do this. We're gonna move that in there. We're gonna get this guy out of here. We're gonna get this here. We're gonna add this around. Like, that's gonna be part of the pitch. He knows the team's not perfect. And I don't know how many landing spots are there where he would be in a much better situation, even though the Cavs situation isn't perfect. There's still a lot of potential there for it to get better, right? For it to get significantly better. And I think he knows that. And I think he would, if he were apathetic, that would be more of a problem, right? If he just did not care that they got beat by 20, if he or 30, if he did not care that he had only scored 14 points in the month of March, if he were just like, oh yeah, man, it's the league. Like, if he were just completely apathetic about it, it wouldn't make as many headlines, but it would probably be more concerning, because that then sounds like a player who's like, well, I don't work here at the Mayo.
Checked out. Yeah.
Right. Like, him being frustrated means like he wants this to be better because he sees this as something that he's going to be doing past May, or potentially. So no, I don't think that that's necessarily like this whole negative sign that he hates the Cavs. And like, a lot of the Donovan Mitchell stuff has been super weird too, because like people were just like, oh, he just wants to leave so bad out of nowhere. Like,
yeah. There's been no like substance to it. He hasn't given any like legit indication that he doesn't like being in Cleveland. In fact, everything he said has been the opposite. Every report that comes out is like, oh, he loves it here. He's really happy. Even that comment that he made recently, it's like, what I got overlooked and wasn't even included in a lot of the tweets and quotes that were going out there is that he said, yeah, we need to pull it together. And I think we're gonna. Like, he ended it by saying, I think we're gonna do it. I think we'll pull it together. I think we'll figure it out. Like, I believe in this team. But they don't include that part. They just include the part where he's frustrated. They also don't even include really the fact that he wasn't just talking about, I mean, they framed it like he was mad at his teammates. He was mad at himself. He's been underperforming too. He knows he needs to be better. Obviously, the knee injury is something that I'm very concerned about. I don't know how much that's going to be a factor in the playoffs. Right now, it's something that I'm keeping an eye on and I'm really worried about. But as far as his future goes, I agree. I think it just comes down to being in the best place to win. I think everything that he has said has just come down to, I want to win basketball games, and wherever I can do it, that's where I'm going to be. It's important to remember he didn't force his way out of Utah. He kind of, he had some complaints. He didn't seem too happy there, but he never demanded a trade. They traded him on their own accord.
Yeah, it seems like with Donovan Mitchell, like people just like, it seems like people are very comfortable assuming what he wants. And then like when they're wrong about it, they never acknowledge that they're wrong. And then they keep using the same logic that they used to be wrong about the next thing that he's going to do. Yes, he's from New York. Would he love to play for the Knicks? I bet, like, if he grew up a Knicks fan, that'd probably be like, I would like to play for the team I like growing up. But is that opportunity there? No, it's really not there for him, right? They clearly moved on from wanting Donovan. They've went a different direction.
Oh, they don't even need him at this point.
Yeah, they went a different direction at that point. So it's like, okay, well, I don't know if any, like, look, I know it's still New York, but you don't grow up wanting to play for the Knicks and then like, okay, I guess I'll play for the Nets. Like, that's not how that works. Like,
yeah.
Like, that don't make much sense to me. And people were throwing out Boston and all this. And it's like, maybe he just plays where it makes sense for him to play, right? Like, if he's going to make a basketball move, he seems like somebody who's always been pretty basketball oriented with the decisions that he's made in his career. So I don't know why people assume that that's just going to change. Like, like he feels like he needs to be a bigger star and play in LA or something like that. It's just one of those weird things where it's like, people are talking about every reason he would go to a different team that has nothing to do with like basketball. And even with LeBron, who kind of invented this like idea of like, oh, well, he wants to go somewhere. He made that move because of basketball reasons, right?
Oh,
like he didn't just go to Miami for fun. He went to Miami because D Wade and Chris Bosh were there, right? And they had Eric Spoelstra, who turned out to be, it's funny because I still can't get over the fact that Eric Spoelstra is the second most tenured coach in the NBA. And I remember when he was super young, like too young to be coaching LeBron. Like, you remember that, right? It's nuts.
Yeah, I think LeBron at times was challenging him almost. Like, he wasn't sure if Spo was the guy. And Spo's, I mean, he's more than proven himself at this point.
Yeah, he's going Mario Chalmers and him all the time. But it's just like, okay, that's why he went there. He felt like they had the right structure for him to win. Donovan Mitchell wants to win. And I think a Cavs team that has a lot of young players who are still very good, like even if you don't think Jarrett Allen's a part of the long-term thing, he's still still very valuable, not very expensive. Darius Garland is still a type of player that a lot of teams would want if you want to move on from him. Like he's still somebody you can get a lot for. Even Isaac Okoro is played into being a player that might be valuable to somebody in a trade, or it might be valuable to you if you do move on from Darius Garland, right? Like, and Evan Mobley is clearly like super valuable. He talks about it all the time. He sees it every day in practice. So, I think that's what he's going to think about, not necessarily how close I am to this city and whatnot there, because at the end of the day, you can get to Cleveland, New York in less than 45 minutes if you really want to. Right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
And like with sports players, they're never home. I think you heard Lou Williams on the podcast.
Road half
I'm
the year
home
anyway.
like 2 times a week. Like it does not matter where I live. So it doesn't make very much sense. Like, these players can live where they want to in the offseason. And I'm pretty sure Donovan lives wherever he wants to in the offseason. So I don't think he's itching to like play for somebody else just to get out of Cleveland. Cleveland's not really inconvenient to where he wants to live in the offseason.
Yeah, I think the general like NBA perspective has been a little skewed when we talk about like the disgruntled star that forces his way to a certain franchise. Like really, when you look over the last few years, it's basically just been like Kyrie, James Harden, who are really the ones doing, like they've done it each like 3 different times, where to them it's like it's less about basketball and more just whatever they want out of life, which is completely fine and valid. But I feel like we apply that mentality to other stars like Donovan Mitchell, who has never shown to be that type of guy. He has always consistently been like, I just want to win basketball games. But our like NBA perspective has kind of thrown that reputation on him because we're used to a handful of other guys doing it. So I'm really not all that concerned about it. And even worst case scenario, if let's say the Cavs go out in the first round and they have to change some things with the roster, as you were saying, you can move Darius Garland and get a lot back. You can move Jarrett Allen and get a lot back. I guarantee the Cavs would rather build around Mitchell at this point than Garland or Allen. No shots at them, but this is the best place for him to win basketball games, I think, because if he goes to New York, I don't even think New York wants him. But if he goes to the Nets, what's their move to become a contender? Like, are you betting on Mikal Bridges being your guy? Like, the Cavs have a promising young core and a core that they can blow up and kind of shift the pieces around if they need to around Mitchell. So I don't think it would make sense for him to leave this basketball situation, barring something completely unforeseen.
Yeah, and if he wants to play for the Knicks because he wants to play in front of that crowd at Madison Square Garden, it's all passionate. And that was one of the first things he noticed with the Cavs. Was like, oh, these fans are loud, they're passionate. Yeah, man, he ain't gonna play for no Nets.
Yeah, that's a neutral site basically every game. So
the Clippers have a better reputation in their city than the Nets do.
Yeah.
And like it's funny where like we live in this era where like the Nets and the Clippers have had all these stars play for their teams and nobody cares. It single-handedly dispels the myth that like, oh, we only care about players in the modern NBA. It's like, nah, these brands matter. Like you could have James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant on the Nets and nobody cares. Like everybody's watching Julius Randle on the Knicks win 30 games because that's the Knicks. Like, or the same thing with the Lakers. People were watching Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram and Kyle Kuzma go out there try to win 40 games. Meanwhile, the Clippers got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and can't nobody be bothered to watch that. So yeah, these brands matter. And that's another thing. It's like, oh, if he's looking for like a very intense fan base, I don't know if he wants to play for Nets. Now, maybe he might be looking for something where people ain't dissecting everything that he does and like always talking about it. Maybe he's tired of this whole Cleveland experience. Like, and maybe that is appealing to him. But yeah, he seems like a competitor. I just see no reason why he wouldn't make a basketball decision at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. And just to cover all bases, I mean, look, I don't know what Donovan Mitchell has planned. So if he completely proves me wrong, then so be it. But that's just kind of my perspective on this. And I definitely agree with what you said. That's all for today's episode of In or Out. Quincy, thanks for doing this. It's always a great discussion. Hopefully the Cavs will do us some justice in Utah tonight, pick up a good win for us. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
Let Laurie go off for 40 so people can complain about the trade again.